We are witnessing a chain of events in Iran that just a short time ago would have seemed inconceivable. And the sword is drawing close to the regime's neck, and even the Revolutionary Guards are beginning to understand that after the humiliating defeat in the recent war with Israel and the United States, what was will no longer be. However, they are still playing a double game on the nuclear issue. Meanwhile, the terrorist organization Hamas announced, "We have conveyed a response to the hostage deal negotiations in a positive spirit." And President Trump has replied that this is a good start, but we know the terrorist organization has not folded and has not blinked. On the contrary, Hamas's answer has simply exposed their grave bluff. In fact, the IDF announced over the weekend that it has operational control over 65% of the Gaza Strip area and is very close to achieving the strategic goals of Operation Gideon's Chariots. However, meanwhile, another Lebanese terrorist operating on behalf of Iran's Quds Force was eliminated. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you all the truth about what is happening in Israel. And over the weekend, Hamas transmitted its response to the negotiating mediators after internal consultations, stating, "We are fully ready to enter immediately into negotiations on a mechanism to implement the agreement." And Israel confirmed the response has been received. Its details are being examined. However, nice words are one thing, while actions are something else. Even as its leaders were talking about coming to an arrangement to end this war, Hamas fighters were attacking an aid distribution compound in Rafah in the Gaza Strip, wounding 2 aid workers. And the American GHF Foundation published fragments of a grenade that it claims was thrown at its workers and stated, "This is what those trying to feed civilians are facing now." Despite this, the Trump administration hopes to announce a deal during Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to the White House on Monday, and Jerusalem is preparing to dispatch a delegation to finalize understandings, but Hamas is still erecting obstacles and is demanding several amendments to this framework. With all of this in mind, I believe that it is not advisable at this time to celebrate Hamas's answer because it attached 3 reservations that in practice constitute a negative replay, and Hamas continues to bargain as if it is not cornered and has not been defeated on the battlefield in Gaza. However, there is another report of relevance to this story, as senior Hamas officials in Qatar have been instructed to surrender their personal weapons. I'm not sure what the significance of that is, but it is reportedly part of a large American effort to make progress in the negotiations. Personally, I don't really think it makes much difference to anything if Hamas leaders in Qatar have a personal weapon on them or not, but it matters a lot if Hamas fighters in the Gaza Strip can still fire weapons at me and my family and the rest of Israel. And in these last few days, 2 rockets were fired towards Israeli civilians from inside the Gaza Strip. These rockets were intercepted, but they remind us of the work that is needed to be done by the IDF in order to destroy all these stockpiles of weapons and ammunitions that Hamas still holds in tunnels and bunkers in the Gaza Strip. And meanwhile, in the Palestinian village of Barata, north of Jerusalem, and on the seam line near the Israeli city of Caesarea, security forces arrested a terror cell that was preparing for an immediate attack. To the north, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps continues to try and rebuild Hezbollah in Lebanon, but Israel continues to detect these efforts and shut them down. 4 strikes were carried out on Saturday morning in southern Lebanon in what appears to be a campaign of targeted eliminations. This occurs alongside Hezbollah's attempts to stage shows of force and behind the scenes talks about disarming the organization, and while the Iranians are trying to advance and rebuild offensive capabilities for Hezbollah and Palestinian organizations in several areas. This includes not only in Lebanon, but also in Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us a closer look at this story. Personally, I think that Iran should stop spending time and resources trying to rebuild terrorist organizations to threaten Israel and fix their own country's many problems instead. But reports in the Iranian international news portal indicate that the regime actually is spending a fair amount of time and resources on internal security, which is another way of saying brutal repression of their own population. The report adds that Iran's long-suffering population is dealing with a sense of fear and suffocation, and everyone is wondering how much more it can take. And meanwhile, according to senior political sources, Iran will at some stage return to negotiations with the United States on the new nuclear agreement, yet there are parallel fears that it will move the entire nuclear project onto a clandestine track. So guys, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and with me is Mati Shoshani, and together we bring you boots on the ground, the news reports that brings you all the truth about what's happening in Israel on day 638 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region operating under the control of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to call on you to keep showing up for the truth. The people of Israel are fighting dark forces that spreads lies and twist reality, and I'm asking you to help us spread the truth, support what we do here at TBN Israel, share this video, and make sure you subscribe to Boots on the Ground, to TBN Israel YouTube channel, and help us reach more people with what's going on so that they will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, to start our report, we focus on the Gaza Strip. Against the backdrop of the negotiations for a ceasefire and the end to the war in Gaza, the IDF published a summary of the force's activities in the Gaza Strip over the past week on Saturday evening. And according to the announcement, the IDF controls about 65% of the Gaza Strip. It was also stated that more than 100 terrorists were eliminated in the past week, amongst them the head of the Combat Assistance Staff of Hamas's military wing, Qasem Issa, a section head in the operations department of the Khan Yunis Brigade in Gaza, and Muhammad El-Sheikh, a company commander in a Zaytun battalion, Issa Abbas, and a company commander in the Tufa battalion, Muhammad Jarousa. It was further stated that the 98th and the 162nd divisions jointly carried out an attack against terrorists of Hamas's Gaza Brigade in the north of the Gaza Strip. And in recent months, the Air Force has struck more than 7,500 terror infrastructures, including weapons depots, rocket launchers, and underground routes. And meanwhile, for the first time since the American-based Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF, began operating in Gaza, 2 American aid workers were wounded on Saturday at one of the foundation's distribution points south of Khan Yunis. According to the foundation, 2 attackers threw 2 grenades at the Americans. The grenades thrown at them were later determined to be of Iranian manufacture. However, the security personnel did not return fire because the attackers fled into a crowd of civilians, and the Americans refrained from shooting so as not to harm the population that Hamas used as human shields. The foundation later published images from the attack, including pieces of the grenades that were recovered, saying these are pieces of a grenade packed with ball bearings. 2 such grenades were thrown by Hamas at American aid workers supplying food in Gaza. The men who threw them ran into a crowd of civilians. This is what those trying to feed civilians are now facing. The world should see this. The 2 wounded Americans had previously served in the United States Navy SEALs, and they were hospitalized at the Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, in Israel, a day after they raised the United States flag at the distribution center in honor of American Independence Day. This is a good place for me to extend my own congratulations to our American viewers on the occasion of July 4th. So happy birthday, America, and getting back to the GHF, that they said in an official statement that a grenade attack occurred at the end of a successful distribution in which thousands of Gazans received food safely. No local aid workers or civilians were harmed. GHF has repeatedly warned of threats from Hamas, including explicit plans to harm American staff, Palestinian aid workers, and the civilians who depend on us for food. This is according to a GHF statement. And United States Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee responded to the unusual incident with a statement saying, "With Hamas, no good deeds goes unpunished." During the foundation's activity, there have been cases in which its workers were harmed by Hamas actions, but this is the first time that American workers are amongst the injured. The IDF spokesperson's unit stated that the terror organizations operating in the Gaza Strip continued their attempts to thwart the distribution of humanitarian aid at the designated distributing complexes for the population in the Strip, thereby cynically harming the residents of Gaza. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development, and as always, we invite you to keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. Most importantly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now, as I just mentioned, the wounded American GHF workers were taken to the Soroka Hospital in Beersheba. I don't know how they got there, but I know how people usually arrive at that hospital and every other hospital in Israel, which is usually abroad an ambulance from Magen David Adom. As we've shown you in previous shows, Israel has been through hell. Missile strikes from Iran, and before that, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and of course, Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Cities have been under fire, lives have been lost, and homes have been destroyed. And through all of it, Magen David Adom was there first, treating the injured, evacuating the wounded, and saving lives under fire. Now, the immediate threat may have passed. Maybe the war is coming closer to an end, especially when we look at Iran. But the recovery has just begun. Hundreds of people are still in hospitals. Communities are still shaken. And Magen David Adom, they're still working, rebuilding, restocking, retraining, so that they'll be ready for whatever comes next. They've given everything, and now it's our turn to give back and help save lives in Israel. So guys, if you want to help Magen David Adom, go to savelifeisrael.com. Again, that's savelifeisrael.com. Help Magen David Adom recover, restock, train new volunteers, and be ready, because saving lives doesn't stop when the rockets do. Now, getting back into the news and keeping our focus on the Gaza Strip, because Hamas delivered an official response to the latest proposal for a ceasefire, which was characterized by a positive approach, so-called. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, is optimistic and believes that an agreement can be reached within a week, but the road to a hostage deal is still long. The full draft proposal, published on Friday in the Saudi newspaper El Majalla, shows that essential details on several key issues have not been finalized. For instance, it remains unclear which Palestinian prisoners will be released, as the draft says that in exchange for the release of 10 living hostages and the remains of 18 who have died in captivity, Israel will release an agreed-upon number of Palestinian prisoners. Although the number is not specified, the formulas are relatively known, and the estimate is that 1,000 prisoners, including around 100 who are serving life sentences, will be released. But Hamas is likely to include demands for the release of individuals who have high symbolic value, and Israel will object. And another detail which will need to be finalized is the mechanism for the distribution of aid. The draft states that aid will be distributed through agreed-upon channels, including the United Nations and the Red Crescent. Distribution through the American Aid Foundation, the GHF, is not explicitly mentioned, and Hamas demands that the aid mechanism be in accordance with the understandings from the previous ceasefire and that the American company be removed from the Gaza Strip. But Israel will not agree to remove GHF from the Gaza Strip, and the United States as well, which has just announced a $30 million transfer to the foundation, and they will also refuse, most likely. Additionally, according to the draft, with the start of the ceasefire, the IDF will redeploy in the north of the Gaza Strip and along the Netzarim corridor, and after a week, also in the south of the Gaza Strip. Hamas demands a gradual withdrawal of the IDF to the position set in the previous ceasefire agreement, whereas the new agreement states that the deployment will be according to maps that will be agreed upon. So in fact, the details have not yet been settled, and a dispute is expected over the extent of the withdrawal and the new lines. So far, Israel has agreed to withdraw to the Morag corridor, the corridor in the south of the Strip, also called Philadelphia No. 2, but insists on maintaining a perimeter of at least 1.2 kilometers inside the Gaza Strip, 250 meters beyond the original perimeter. And finally, Hamas is demanding a commitment that fighting will not resume after 60 days of ceasefire, and they also want a guarantee for continued negotiations. A source close to Hamas told the Israeli news portal, Ynet, that Egypt, Qatar, and the United States must provide guarantees for the continuation of the process. And on the other hand, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not said even once that he supports ending the war as part of a deal, and he has only recently clarified there will be no Hamas, there will be no Hamastan, a country of Hamas. We're not going back to that. It is over. In any case, the wording of the guarantees has not yet been disclosed. In practice, I believe it is not advisable at this time to celebrate Hamas's response because it attached 3 reservations that in fact constitute a negative answer. They seem to be making the same foolish mistakes that the Ayatollah regime in Iran is making, acting as if they've won this war and are therefore in a position to make maximalist demands. Nothing could be further from the truth for either Iran or for Hamas, and as always, it will be ordinary Iranians and also Palestinians in Gaza who pay the ultimate price. Now, getting back to the negotiations, if Hamas conditions are accepted, it will be considered a resounding failure for the IDF's latest military move in the Gaza Strip, dubbed Gideon's Chariots. It would allow Hamas to recover, and in the Middle East, this would mean a victory for Hamas. Hamas's reply contains nothing new, only different packaging of the same maximalist demands that they've been making for months now. In fact, Hamas's reply is not more flexible, but the opposite. Hamas states that it is standing on its feet and planning for the long range to remain the significant factor in the Gaza Strip the day after this war, positioning themselves for the future while tying Israel's hands and denying it the levers of pressure for continuation on the day of the deal for 10 live hostages and the remains of those who have died in captivity. We've heard all of this from Hamas before, and Israel's answer has always been to say no to these demands. There is no reason that we can think of that Israel will give a different answer this time, even as a basis for holding talks. On the contrary, Israel must now conduct a renewed evaluation of the moves that it had carried out in Gaza over the last 22 months before making a decision about what to do next. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we'll continue to report on all the developments in the Gaza Strip. And as always, we invite you to be part of the team by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and clicking on the subscribe button if you haven't already. Now, we are switching our focus to Iran, and in a moment, TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will explain why the regime in Iran is behaving like its hair is on fire, arresting people and making endless speeches in which it threatens to destroy Israel, America, Saudi Arabia, and everything in between. Israel continues to conduct intelligence oversight of what is happening in Iran, focusing on several targets, including Iranian attempts to rehabilitate the nuclear project and rescue capabilities from the damaged sites. Also being monitored are Iranian efforts to rebuild the ballistic missile array, including restoring launch areas, launchers, and figuring out how to create a system suited to the next confrontation. Finally, currently of great concern to the security establishment, including every Mossad station and the Shin Bet security network in Israel and worldwide, are the attempts by Iran to carry out terror attacks. In recent days, attack attempts in European countries have been foiled. Mati will give us all the details and will also reveal which way the wind is blowing in light of the fact that the United States President Donald Trump declared on Saturday that Iran has not agreed to inspections of its nuclear program or to stop enriching uranium. Over to you, Mati Shoshani.
Thank you, Yair. Indeed, these are dramatic days here in Israel and in the Middle East. Tomorrow, Monday, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are planned to meet in the White House to discuss a historic change of power and alignments here in the Middle East. What's going to be on the table? Really big topics. The new deal with Iran and how Israel, together with the US, can do everything in our power to prevent them from ever again in our lifetime reaching nuclear capabilities. The hostage deal with Hamas, which has been under negotiation for a long time, and along with that, a regional agreement that might be the next Abraham Accords. All of that is planned to happen in an upcoming meeting. And in the background of that meeting, Israeli politicians, and specifically the heads of our government, have been deep in discussion over the weekend, trying to decide what Israel is willing to do to seal the deal when it comes to Iran, and seal the deal specifically with what it entails with the ongoing military presence in the Gaza Strip, and most importantly, the hostage deal. So give me a couple minutes, we're going to break down everything that's happening here. It is a very important, very fast-paced, very dramatic weekend that's been taking place here in Israel, because we're once again inching towards the end of the conflict and the transition towards diplomatic solution and diplomatic agreements instead of ongoing warfare. Very important times, very dramatic times, and a lot is going on. For Israel, one of the biggest topics of negotiation is Hamas. And let me explain that. Israel, for more than a year and a half, has been working in one clear direction: eliminate Hamas military presence in the Gaza Strip and return the hostages to Israel. And we've been partially successful on both of those areas. We've removed much of the Hamas military presence and chipped away at most of their military capability, especially as an organized fighting force in the Gaza Strip, and also returned many of the hostages. But still, there are many hostages that remain in the Gaza Strip, and Hamas continues to fight Israel. Now, where is this negotiation going? It's both interesting and complicated at the same time, as are most things here. Israel has been trying to do several things. Remove Hamas's sort of chokehold over the Gaza Strip by distributing aid directly to the people of Gaza through GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund. That's one part of things. The second part is because of the ongoing successful campaign against Iran, against the Houthis, Israel and the US are in a better position now to pressure Hamas. Israel has also scaled up its military presence and operations in the Gaza Strip in recent weeks, all with an attempt to put a maximum pressure campaign on Hamas and prevent them from continuing to fight against Israel. All in all, our goal is very clear. We want the hostages back. For Hamas, the picture is a little more complicated, and you see that in their response to the negotiation. They always push back with requests that are just a small change, quote unquote, of what was requested. And they just say, all we want is for you never to attack us again. All we want is to maintain all our power. And these are simply no-goes for the people of Israel and especially the government of Israel. I need to tell you, the debate over what's going to happen in the Gaza Strip was a very publicized, angry debate within our Israeli war cabinet, because we understand that this enemy is an enemy that has to be dealt with now, and pushing away or postponing the decision about how we fight Hamas, how we eliminate Hamas, and possibly not receiving all the hostages now is once again a no-go for the people of Israel. So this might seem like the smallest of issues, but this is the opening chords of the October 7th war, and it probably will be the toughest negotiation that we encounter aside from Iran in this entire process. Let's talk about Iran for a second. So here's a summary of the past episodes in this series. Israel, with the aid of the US, dismantled much of the Iranian nuclear program. Much of their depleted uranium is or missing or probably moved to hiding. Much of their military, their religious, and their nuclear program leadership is no longer alive. They've been assassinated. And now we continue with a maximum pressure campaign to force the Iranians into an agreement. Here's what's been happening the last week or so. One, we know that the Iranians have been trying to rebuild, reestablish, and find their enriched uranium. They're not stopping with those efforts, and both Israel and the US have called them out publicly on this topic. But something else has also happened. Israel and the US haven't ended this war campaign. The US and Israel are meeting, as I said, Netanyahu and Trump are meeting tomorrow, and one of the big discussion topics is creating guarantees between the Israeli government and the American government, where we know we're able to take action quickly against Iran without having to have this prolonged discussion over how we will respond and what the response will be. Now that we've seen that Israel and the US are able to eliminate the nuclear program in Iran, and we know that they continue to seek promoting that program, we have to choose what course of action we're going to take. It's one, very clearly, very distinctly, supervisors come back to Iran and they prevent them from reaching nuclear capabilities again. That is a very problematic statement, because even now the Iranians push back on any kind of supervision, and President Trump has publicly warned them, saying this kind of behavior will result in continued military action against them. The B-2 bombers are still ready to bomb them again, as is Israel, if they continue to prevent supervision of their nuclear program. And then there's another option here, which is if an agreement isn't achieved, Israel and the US have to go back to attacking Iran, because we can't allow them to regain their nuclear capabilities. And meanwhile, in Iran, their problems with the US and Israel aren't the only problems that they're dealing with. There's another issue that is really big on the table, and that's their internal pressures. They've lost a lot. Think about it from their perspective. They have a civilian population that has seen their government in its weakness. They've been exposed to have been penetrated by Israeli intelligence, Israeli operatives, Mossad operatives, and probably have a large number of internal collaborators with Israel, which is something the Iranian government has admitted to time and time again. They've also admitted to taking substantial damage both to infrastructure and to everything related to their nuclear program. And that weakness and that loss of grasp or control over their population is a big problem for a dictatorship like Iran. And where do we see this manifest? We see it in the extreme violence that they've been using in recent weeks against their population, which is always in direct correlation in a dictatorship between how much they fear their population, how much of internal pressure they're suffering from, and you always see that in the violent response against their people. And in recent weeks, the Iranian government has been using a very violent and heavy hand against its population simply because they know they've been exposed in their weakness, and the opposition and the forces within Iran that are against the government are gaining strength simply by that factor. So they have a choice. Do they enter an agreement, or do they risk the chance of yet another additional attack by the US and Israel? I know where I would go with this, but Iran has shown us time and time again they don't always take what we find to be the logical course of action. In summary, I have a message to anyone watching this in the United States of America. This meeting between Trump and Netanyahu is a historical and important meeting because it gets to do two things, to solidify the commitment of Israel and the US to work together. These last weeks of ongoing shared campaigns against Iran are testament to how deep that connection, how deep the bond between Israel and the US is. But it also does another thing. This agreement can set clear boundaries and clear steps to be taken against Iran if they push back towards a nuclear capability. And when we get to do that, when we have that framework and that agreement, it allows us to move forward into the future with greater security, greater confidence, both for Israel and American interest here in the Middle East. And then there's a really important piece to that. All of that leads to the next phase of the Abraham Accords. It leads to the Saudis joining the table and several other countries that have been waiting to see where this goes and how this materializes. When they see the projection of power and the unity between the Israeli government and the US, they'll see that as a sign to enter into a new Abraham Accords agreement that will bring what this region needs: financial prosperity, stability, and peace. Now back to Yair Pinto.
So thank you very much, Mati, for putting everything in order for us. And once again, I want to ask you guys, back at home, wherever you are watching this, to help us share the truth. How can you do that? You can tell a friend what's going on in Israel. You can hit the share, you can leave a comment, and also you can hit the subscribe button and help us stand for the truth and know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. This is what we're all about here. And now we turn to the other battlefronts of Israel. The IDF continues its strict enforcement policy in southern Lebanon. Throughout the day on Saturday, the Air Force, guided by the Northern Command intelligence, carried out 3 strikes, and at least one of the targeted eliminations of Hezbollah operatives succeeded. In the area of the village of Ainta near Binchbel, troops of the 91st Division spotted a Hezbollah Radwan operative, and a short time later, a fighter jet struck this operative who was in a vehicle and eliminated him. At the same time, the Air Force struck several Hezbollah operatives in the village of Ikrit in southern Lebanon, and reports say that several operatives were hit and wounded. And a short time later, the Air Force struck operatives in the village of Shiba in the Mount Dov area. And Lebanese reports also speak of several wounded operatives, while the IDF spokesperson's unit announced that another Hezbollah Radwan operative was eliminated also in Ainta. And meanwhile, on Saturday morning, it was reported that in what appears to be an unusual and highly charged move, armed Hezbollah activists held a symbolic military parade in the heart of Beirut's El Khamra neighborhood, one of the city's central civilian areas. Masked, armed forces appeared in the public space equipped with weapons, accompanied by an organized show of force. The images, which spread quickly on social media, provoked public anger and a wave of internal criticism in the political system. Sources in Lebanon view this step not only as a breach of public order, but as a clear signal from Hezbollah regarding its future plans after the recent confrontation with Israel. However, according to sources cited in Arab media, the organization is in the midst of a strategic reassessment after the war, which may lead to a partial reduction of its weaponry. We'll see. The Iranians are certainly trying to promote and rebuild offensive capabilities for Hezbollah and for Palestinian organizations in several arenas, while the IDF is working to strike the key actors precisely. For instance, on Thursday, the Air Force used precise intelligence guidance from the Shin Bet, the Northern Command, and the military intelligence to strike in the area of the village of Kafr Sil and eliminated Qasem Salah el-Husseini, a Lebanese terrorist who was advancing terror schemes against Israeli civilians and against the IDF forces on the northern front on behalf of the IRGC. Israel says that el-Husseini was a significant figure in the weapons smuggling access from Iran via Syria to various focal points in the northern sector and elsewhere, and maintained ties with Syrian and with Lebanese smugglers. El-Husseini operated under the Quds Force direction and assisted in its efforts to smuggle weapons into Israel for terror operations. But this guy won't be doing that any longer, and the terrorist organizations threatening Israel have lost another asset which they will have a difficult time to replace. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will keep spreading the truth So give a click to that subscribe button if you haven't already, so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time and know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Now, we are staying on the subject of counter-terrorism operations, but we're shifting our focus to Israel's internal front. In a dramatic operation on Saturday morning, combined forces of the Shin Bet, the Yalam counter-terror unit, and the Duvdevan unit arrested 3 terrorists from the village of Barata in Wadi Ara, who, according to suspicions, planned to carry out a shooting attack in Israeli territory in the immediate future. The operation began in the morning hours when, based on precise intelligence from the General Security Services, Yamam fighters and the Shin Bet operational unit raided a business in Barata where 2 members of the cell were staying. The 2 were arrested on the spot without resistance, and shortly afterwards, undercover Duvdevan fighters and IDF soldiers from the Menashe Brigade covertly entered another village in the brigade sector, raided the home of the 3rd terrorist and arrested him. And in the home of one of the suspects, a firearm was found that apparently was meant to be used by the cell in the planned attack. The arrests took place while the village of Barata was bustling with people, many of whom have come to its markets, considered one of the largest shopping centers in the Sin Zone area. And despite the operational complexity, the raid ended with no casualties to the security forces or amongst the civilian population, while the 3 suspects, all residents of Barata, were handed over to the Shin Bet for interrogation. And security officials emphasized that swift and precise action, as well as cooperation between the Shin Bet, the Israeli police, and the IDF prevented a serious attack and eliminated an immediate threat to the civilian lives. And on that subject, since we just marked American Independence Day, I'd like to quote the man who wrote America's Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. He said, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." A lot of countries in what used to be called the free world seem to have forgotten about that. But in Israel, we will never forget it. I'm sure that Americans will not forget it either, and hopefully others will start to remember again soon as well. In any case, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development. So guys, keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Israel, pray for the release of our hostages held in Gaza, keep praying for the safety of our IDF soldiers in the air, at sea, and on land, and pray for the peace of the people of Israel and all those that are affected by these terrorist organizations. If it's the people of Iran, the people of the Gaza Strip, the people of Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and anywhere else that is affected by these terrorist destructive regime. Most importantly, make sure to put your trust only in God and pray for the peace of Jerusalem.